Hopefully, most of us
Okay.
know that Kristen has been a leadership person for Moms Demand Action. First, she was really over Boone County, and now she has state responsibilities. And bringing this issue to the forefront is so exciting. And so I'm really excited to hear from Kristen today.
Oh, thank you, Alice. I'm happy to introduce myself, and I want to introduce a couple of other of the moms volunteer leaders in Columbia who are with me on the call today. Jean Mahale, who you can see is Jean is waving. And I'm gonna ask Jean to help me if during the time when I'm presenting, you all have questions, please put them in the chat and Jean will holler at me and let me know because I can't always see those when I'm showing slides. And also joining Jean, I should say, is our volunteer leader who works specifically on elections and legislative priorities. So Jean is an expert on the work that we do in Jefferson City and is in fact the person who leads up our rapid response team. So I'm happy to see you here, Jean. If people have questions about how they can get involved in our rapid response to terrible gun legislation, Jean is the person to contact. And also joining me today is Kathleen Darchuk. Hi, Kathleen. Kathleen is the local group co-lead here in Columbia, and I'm being told my internet is unstable. So I'm gonna text my family and tell them to get off the Wi-Fi. We are dealing with homeschool situation here today, so bear with me. I am now the host of the call, so I'm going to go ahead and get ready to share my screen. Kathleen also has little ones at home, so I know she's probably trying to feed lunch and get people off to where they need to be. But I want to thank you both for joining me today, and feel free to jump in and add where I maybe missed something, okay? Unmute yourself, Kathleen and Jean, if you need to. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. So just to reintroduce myself quickly, my name is Kristen Bowen and I am a deputy chapter leader for the Missouri chapter of Moms Demand Action. I started the local Columbia Moms Demand Action group in 2015. I have been a Columbia resident since 2004. I started the group here in Columbia after a summer-long series of many horrific public mass shootings, and I just decided I couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. I was active on social media where moms in fact began, but I started the local group to take action here in Columbia. And I want to talk to you briefly just about who we are, because I know some of you, I've seen some of you all at our events and our meetings, but not everyone. And it's important that we talk about who Moms Demand is and talk about how we act. And then I'm going to talk about today, Alice invited me to talk to you about our legislative priorities and some specific actions that you all can take to get involved in this issue. So thank you again, Alice, for reaching out to us. I want to also acknowledge that I know you meet weekly, but many of you may be here in particular today because of a specific incident of gun violence that raised your awareness of this issue. But the fact is that about 100 people every single day in this country are killed through gun violence, and about 230 more are wounded every single day. And we know that these tragedies may never make headlines, especially when we're talking about gun suicide or gun deaths in Black and Brown communities. Our goal in Moms Demand Action is to end gun violence in all of its forms and in all our communities. So I know many of you on this Zoom call may have personally been impacted by gun violence, and I just want to start by acknowledging that the work that we do in Moms, we honor victims and survivors of gun violence, and I want to just take a minute to acknowledge you and thank you if you are a survivor for being here today. So at a typical Moms Demand event, you know, if we were at our monthly meeting, we would always begin or ground what we present in the facts about gun violence. It's why I'm sharing a few key points with you. Every Town for Gun Safety, which is a group that you may have also heard of. It's the organization that supports the grassroots work that Moms does. They have a really robust research team, and that helps us make sure that the facts that we present about gun violence are supported, that we are really equipped to do our work strategically using evidence-based strategies that we know will reduce gun violence. So I want to share one screen of data here. And I think it's really relevant to the topic of talking about policy, talking about legislation. Because, you know, raise your hand if you've heard the myth that there's just nothing that we can do, right? I mean, I know I've heard the myth before, you know, after Sandy Hook Elementary and that tragic shooting, if our lawmakers didn't act then, what can be done, right? That there's nothing to be done to prevent gun violence. But we can see that this is just 100% not the case. When we compare what we've seen in Missouri to states like New York or Connecticut, where strong policies are in place, we can see in those states that they have seen over the last decade or so a substantial decrease in gun deaths. But in states like ours, where policies have been repealed, we see that gun deaths have increased. So this is actually a brand new updated overview of what it looks like here in Missouri in the last 10 years. And just a little background, a little legislative background. In 2007, here in Missouri, our lawmakers repealed the requirement to that you must have a background check on every handgun sale, making us one of very few states in recent years to do so, I think. So that was 2007. In 2016, against the strong opposition of law enforcement and groups like mine, lawmakers enacted a measure that we call permitless carry. It's basically a law that now allows people in Missouri to carry hidden loaded handguns in public places with no background check, without a permit, and with no safety training. So our permit system still exists, but it's not required. So after these laws were passed, after the repeal of our background check law in particular, we've seen an increase in the gun homicide rate in Missouri. It's been about 61% increase over the past 10 years, and a 37% increase in our firearms suicide rate. Our gun death has skyrocketed. It's 47% over the last decade or so. We use numbers that average over several years. That puts Missouri at number 5 in the nation for our gun death rate. And clearly we have risen in this horrible set of statistics faster than other states. So this data is alarming. But we are confident in Moms Demand Action in our ability to do work to reduce all gun violence. And we have seen that there are outcomes that show that this work can be successful. So I just want to back up for a second and say who we are, especially given that I'm talking to Muleskinners. Moms Demand Action is a nonpartisan group. We are a grassroots movement working to reduce all forms of gun violence. We are part of Everytown for Gun Safety, which, along with Students Demand Action and the Everytown Survivor Network, makes us the largest gun violence prevention organization in the country. We have about 6 million supporters. As I said, we're very strategic. We're very evidence-driven. We're a multifaceted organization in that we work on the local, state, and national levels to advance change. But we also work in a sort of a cultural way with organizations and businesses to affect change in policy through, you know, store policies, open carry policies, and the like. I want to talk today about our gun laws. We work on the state and local and federal levels to pass and enforce gun laws that we know will save the most lives. So we prioritize legislation that we know will have the largest impact first. So right now, as you may know, our federal priority is passing a universal background check law, and then also a federal red flag law. And we know that this is a really pivotal moment, right? With the Biden administration, this is the best chance we've had in a long time to get this done. We also have work that we do in some other areas that I just want to introduce briefly, because we are not only involved in legislative action. And Kathleen, who's on the call with me, before she became our local leader, was the person who led our effort in safer gun storage. So I'm going to try and explain what this is, Kathleen, and you jump in if I miss anything. This is an education program that is designed to open dialogue for adults, parents, and caregivers to discuss safe storage. It is not an education program like Eddie Eagle that's aimed at children. This is aimed specifically at adults. So SMART in Be Smart is an acronym. The S stands for secure your guns in your home and vehicles. The M stands for model responsible behavior around guns. The A is ask about presence of unsecure guns in the home. The R is one that we are focused on more and more in recent years as we see the numbers of gun suicides in our state alarmingly high. R stands for risk, recognize the role of guns in suicide. And the T is just to tell your peers to be smart, which is what we're doing right now. Did I get that, Kathleen? I think I covered it. So Be Smart is a program that we also share with community organizations. If the Muleskinners, I know many of you are parts of lots of other organizations, if you can imagine a place where these kinds of messages would be welcome, we love to take this program and present it in homes, in PTAs, in medical contexts, in lots of spaces. So that's something that we do and would love to do more. In 2019, I just want to say we've also, in the last couple of years, really been ramping up our work to support local allies and community partners to reduce homicides in particular. So this includes our work with partnerships with gun violence interrupters and work that involves community gun violence prevention. This is a newer area for us, both in Missouri and in Columbia, and on an organizational level. So for example, in Columbia, we have been strengthening our team working on city gun violence prevention with volunteers working just on that campaign, that issue. We're partnering with Boone County Community Against Violence to do more to prevent local violence here in Columbia. Many of you may know, we also did a lot of work starting in 2018 to elect gun sense candidates. That was a program that we launched in 2018 to help educate and support and elect candidates who are willing to make gun safety a priority. And so in 2018, we supported about 3,000 candidates, both Republicans and Democrats, by the way, across the country. And about 1,000 gun sense candidates were elected to office. And then in 2020, through the Gun Sense Candidate Program, 3,000 Gun Sense candidates were elected in November, which is amazing. We also, I mentioned the Biden administration, we have elected the strongest gun sense candidates to the White House ever. And I just like to share this. I think my numbers are low, but we also had 100 Moms Demand Action volunteer leaders who do what Jean and Kathleen and I do. About 100 leaders across the country ran for office, and I think 30 or 40 of them won. So that's incredible. This work preparing people to become elected officials too is really important and inspiring. We have other work that we do, including creating awareness around gun violence that's preventable. I mentioned Be Smart. I would also mention our biggest annual event, which last year was virtual. It may be virtual again this year, unfortunately. In early June, it's called Wear Orange, where we honor National Gun Violence Awareness Day and bring people together across the community to honor survivors. And then there's the Everytown Survivor Network, which is a community of gun violence survivors. We have a really strong community of survivors in Missouri who support one another and advocate for change and are willing to share their stories publicly, which is so important. So this is a picture of Missouri in pre-COVID times and the 20 local groups that we have in the state. And this is important because you can see we've got groups in lots of rural places. We even have one virtual rural group that meets just online of volunteers from all across the state who hold monthly meetings. Now, after COVID, we did struggle, like many groups, to get people to come to events. But I have been so inspired to work with groups across the state who've been keeping this work going. We know it's so important in Missouri. Before the Parkland shootings in 2018, we had 6 groups across the state. So this really represents an incredible increased interest in this issue, not just in suburban parts of Kansas City and St. Louis and Columbia, right? So why is it so important that what is the landscape for us in Missouri? The data is grim. In an average year, we see about 1,200 people die from guns in Missouri. As I said, we're the 5th highest rate of gun deaths in the United States. And this comes at a huge cost. So we know that there are costs to our society. We know that the gun deaths and injuries in our state cost an average of $10 billion per year. Of that, about $507 million is paid by taxpayers. So we have work to do to talk with lawmakers about what needs to be done to change these grim numbers. So how we work in a normal year is we do try to work closely with both Republicans and Democrats and other public interest groups who share similar goals to ours to reduce gun violence and promote gun safety. We work together to pass legislation that we believe will promote public safety. But we also, as you can imagine, work really hard to defeat bills that would create greater harm to the public. So what do? We meet one-on-one with legislators in their districts. When we can, we write and call with our concerns about specific bills. We mentioned at the top of the meeting that we do hold an advocacy day every year. Last year, we brought in over 400 people from across the state for Advocacy Day. And in a typical year, I've got a few photos here of Jean in the middle there testifying. We staff informational tables at the Capitol in the rotunda in the Capitol about twice a month. So we're there to talk with lawmakers and visitors to the Capitol and staff about our current issues. We testify and attend every single hearing of a bad gun bill that we can. We follow floor votes and proceedings. We write letters to the editor. We speak to the media, and we address community groups like this one. So through this work and through our social media and community activism, our goal is to generate attention on gun violence prevention work and these bills and share that information with the public. Because the reality is, basically, since I started doing this work, every year since 2016, we have extremist lawmakers in Jefferson City pushing to expand the presence of guns in sensitive areas. It's sort of a collection of bills. They basically want to eliminate the places in statute where you can currently not carry a concealed handgun, like college campuses, like daycare centers, hospitals, stadiums, bars, and the like. So I want to dive into our legislative priorities for this year. And I don't know if I've hit anyone has any questions yet, but we may get questions at this point. So I'm going to talk through sort of these bills that we're seeing that are concerning us first. They're not in a particular order, and then they're in different places. One of the things that we are seeing this year, last year was not a great year either, but as you all probably recall, the session was shortened and it forced lawmakers pushing these extreme bills to miss a lot of hearings. Things got put aside. Then there was a big crime omnibus bill with a big push in May. And we were lucky because it didn't advance that some of these same measures that we've been seeing year after year did not pass. So we take that as a win, but they're back. So the first one I want to talk about is HB 85 and 310, and the Senate bill version is 39. These bills are called by their sponsors the Second Amendment Preservation Act. We identify them as nullification bills because what they do is nullify or invalidate federal firearms laws within Missouri. They basically say federal gun laws cannot be enforced by state and local law enforcement. So if you are a state or local police officer, you would be prohibited from enforcing any federal gun law, current or future. These bills would prohibit state and local police from cooperating with federal law enforcement, and particularly in the context of gun trafficking or other federal gun crimes. This is really a serious concern. So the bill title, Second Amendment Preservation Act, makes it seem as though this is somehow a symbolic gesture, or this is a gesture to oppose the Biden administration's potential attempts in the future to take away our guns, right? And I'm sure you've all heard this before. President Obama was also supposedly coming for all of our guns. This is not the case. This set of bills is actually really dangerous for our law enforcement because there are real world effects for them. Specifically, this bill would make it so that if you were a police officer and attempted to enforce or even invoke federal gun law, you would be open to lawsuit. The House bill was amended so that it's actually now, they changed it so that it was originally individual police officers would be open to punishment and lawsuits. They've changed that to punish law enforcement agencies. So your police department would be sued with massive fines for trying to enforce a federal gun law. We know that law enforcement opposes these bills. Very conservative sheriffs have spoken publicly, like the Greene County Sheriff. We know that the Sheriff's Lobbying Association appeared at both hearings for these bills to oppose. But the bill has been voted out of the House and it is passed out of the Senate committee. So this is something we're very concerned about. If you would like to take an action, this is where we are devoting a lot of our energy right now, is writing and calling our state senators, asking them to stop this extremist nullification bill. So next is another bill that we've seen year in and year out, HB 568, which is a guns on campus bill. The bill sponsor, sadly, is one of Columbia's own representatives, Chuck Basie. He is sponsoring a bill that would force public colleges and universities to allow people to carry hidden loaded handguns on campus. And in fact, in spite of the bill's summary, we know that this bill would also apply to private K through 12 schools. So it wouldn't enable people to carry concealed handguns in private schools in spite of the administrator's wishes. So why we oppose this bill, we know that campus stakeholders have opposed this year in and year out. We know that campuses see a significant risk in the security and insurance cost with this bill, but we also know, I think, as a resident in a college town, the incredible risk that this would introduce into our college environments, having students carrying guns into bars, into labs, into faculty offices, in their dorms. It's something we've seen year in and year out, and we're following this very closely. This bill has not yet been heard in committee. It was scheduled last week, got yanked. We don't know why, but we do expect it to come back up for a hearing soon. And when it does come back up, we will be reaching out to all of our supporters to take a digital action. So if you'd be interested in participating with us in that, please sign up. I'll give information for that shortly, or just call your reps and email your reps and let them know that you oppose guns in our higher ed spaces. SB 66, use of force against protesters, is the next on my list. And this actually came up earlier. I think Missouri Jobs for Justice is also following this dangerous bill. In layman's terms, this bill would discourage local governments from allowing lawful protests and encourage people to physically harm protesters. In other words, this bill would make it easier to use lethal force against protesters. This bill has moved out of committee already. Excuse me. It originally had a really dangerous expanded stand your ground language that's been removed. We know that it's still a terrible bill. The idea is that it would make it easier to use force against protesters. Excuse me. I need a water break. Excuse me. So sorry. Lost my voice.
Kristen, can I go ahead and ask a question while you're getting your throat? I don't understand how you can have a law that keeps you from enforcing a federal law. I just think that's unconstitutional on its face. And
It is 100%. I'm so
so,
sorry about my voice. It is 100% unconstitutional.
so they're
We do.
expecting people to sue about it.
That's right. And what we're expecting is that this bill will be challenged. And the problem with that is that even though it is unconstitutional, there are elements of the bill that wouldn't be challenged in that constitutional context. In other words, there are pieces of the bill that even if it was challenged as unconstitutional would remain the penalties to law enforcement in particular. So we can't sit back and hope that this, because it's unconstitutional, obviously we know it'll be challenged, and in fact, every town will likely be involved if it does pass, but we can't go ahead and assume that. Excuse me. Any other questions while I recover here? Sorry.
Well, I would think there'd be a lot of people opposed to these gun laws. So I'm glad you're educating us on what is being brought forth in our state legislature. It's horrifying.
Carl, can you ask a question so I can recover for another minute?
I'm just trying to buy some time here, but
Thank you.
I'm certainly very sympathetic and very empathetic to this cause. In particular, when it comes to HB 85 and 310 and SB 39, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, I keep thinking about Sherry Reich, you know, and some of the stuff that she has done over the years and continues to do. And some people would suggest that one of the solutions to this is term limits. I'm not a fan of term limits. I think elections ought to stand for themselves and so on. On the other hand, there are lots of advantages of incumbents, and I understand all of that. So how do you deal with folks like Sherry Reich in this whole scheme of things? And then the other thing, to go on to another issue, because you've raised all kinds of issues, is HB 568, my good friend Chuck Basey, who has been nasty and vulgar and everything else in emails that I've received from him. He's a former Marine, so semper fi and all of that, but he's a jerk. I guess what I'm wondering is, you know, there's guns on campus and everywhere else. How do you deal with that kind of thing? And what is your position is? But how do you do this effectively to try and counter, obviously, this thing that we have in this urban-rural divide in this rural state that we have? Just whenever you get a chance to clear yourself and speak, I appreciate it.
We do have a challenge with our lawmakers. I think that they have dug in their heels, and Cherie is an example. Chuck Basey has been a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment since I started doing this work, so I can't speak to any change over time for him. But I will say I do recognize that I think one of the features of this hopeful landscape in Washington is that it's caused Republicans in Missouri to really hone in on this issue. They want to use this sort of as a culture war moment to push back against Washington and say, you know, we are going to do what we can to nullify federal gun law, to say no to Washington, to say no to President Biden. What we're doing is what we've done for many years now, which is to bring as many people who are stakeholders, who have an interest in stopping these extremist bills to the table. Unfortunately, the new leadership in the House is not as friendly to moms as actually the Republicans were in the last 2 years. Makes our work harder. And obviously COVID is making our work even harder. So we have a loud voice in social media. The things that we're doing are the things that we've always done and trying to up our game online. We are working with more partners than we have before, but you're right. This is a frightening set of bills to be moving so early and with so much support in the legislative session. You know, in a state where the Missouri Firearms Coalition and other really ultra extreme sort of fringy groups are the ones that lead the discussion in hearing rooms. You would think that the things that are going on across the country with armed extremism would give people some pause in Jefferson City, and we just haven't seen that. So we will continue to work and do outreach to Republican lawmakers. Believe it or not, they do meet with us on Advocacy Day, even Chuck, even Cherie. We continue to find constituents who are willing to come to the table and talk with them and present what we're looking for, because we know that there are some, actually I'm going to get to next, some good gun bills that could be ways for us to find common ground and expand some of our laws to protect more of Missouri families. So I'm just going to talk really quickly about one of the other bills on this list of the bills that we're watching carefully, and that's Guns Everywhere. The Guns Everywhere bills, there's two of them. They're sponsored by the same sponsors that we've seen in past, real extremist lawmakers, champions of these dangerous gun bills. We call them Guns Everywhere. Essentially what they do is eliminate all the places in statute where you currently cannot carry a concealed firearm, like universities, bars, daycares, polling places, hospitals, amusement parks. So there's a set of these sensitive areas in statute now that these bills would eliminate, basically putting more guns in more public places. This year in and year out, we have fought and successfully kept it from getting to the finish line. And this is where, honestly, of all of these terrible bills that we fight, this is the one that concerns me personally the most. We know that the nullification bill is unconstitutional, and I think that there's been some pushback from law enforcement, and that might be influential in the Senate. But Guns Everywhere is another story. So we are following movement of that closely. There are some other bills that have had hearings that are going to probably go to the floor soon. Guns in vehicles against private property owners' wishes. So you can't say, I don't want you to bring guns to my property if you're a business owner, if you're an employer, and guns in churches, which is a reversal of current statute, which currently in Missouri, if you are a congregation, you can elect to have members of the congregation who conceal carry if that's something that you wish to do. This bill in particular, 359, would reverse that. So the church would have to, if they did not want people conceal carrying in their buildings, would have to put signs in their sacred spaces saying, you know, no guns allowed. And we expect and hope that, as in years past, that many faiths lobbying arms will speak up about this. That was just given a House hearing this past week. So now that I've gotten my voice back, does anyone have any questions? I'm going sort of quickly. Yeah, Alvin, I see a hand raised.
Where is the Guns Everywhere? Have they been at hearings yet?
No, and it hasn't been, no, it's not in committee yet. So we're following with interest why that would be. You know, they were out of the gate very quickly with the nullification bill. That seems to be something that on the House side got a lot of co-sponsors and a lot of momentum and was passed very quickly. You may have seen Martha Stevens and other Democrats were writing about that floor debate. It was very heated, and it got somewhat testy. But that's now in the Senate, and I think that has been the priority. That's what we're seeing so far.
Thank you.
Alvin.
Yes, has there been any initiative by your organization to establish a broader coalition of maybe other like thinking organizations? And my thought here is folks like Chuck Basie, and we see a whole myriad of people in legislative bodies, state, local, and federal, who seem to only respond to the threat of whether or not they will be rehired in the next election. And it seems like if that becomes a real threat, it would bring them around to the kind of thinking that those of you and us who believe that there should be some restrictions on gun ownership and use would think would be a common sense kind of thing. But these folks don't seem to go along with that.
That's an excellent question, and I do think that it's a point well taken that the more we can work in coalitions with other agencies and organizations and community groups to show lawmakers that this is not this isn't a left or a right issue. This is a nonpartisan. This is something that people can agree on, regardless of their who they voted for. I think that's really important. One of the challenges I think that we're seeing right now is that doing that kind of outreach to our partners is harder during COVID. We are less visible because we're not in public spaces. You know, a lot of that time that we spent in the Capitol tabling, Jean and I would go twice a month to table in the Capitol, and we'd see these groups. We would see the spokespeople for the Catholic Church. We would see the folks from, you know, the mental health providers. We would specifically schedule our tables to be there so that we could be networking and connecting and showing, you know, not just doing cold calls, but having conversations so that they could see, you know, where we stand and what we're doing. We're keeping that work going, but it's a little harder when we're not in those spaces. One of the things that we're getting ready to do for our advocacy day is call on all of those community partners to ask them to bring to the table people to do this work with us, because we know we can't, you know, we're not sitting on the sidelines this year. The legislation is moving even faster than it has in years past. So we can't stay quiet. But I take your point. It's really important. You know, I will say one of the political downsides for us, you know, in getting so involved in elections and in Missouri, it meant supporting a lot of Democrats. And, you know, that didn't go unnoticed, right? That all of the candidates who sought the Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate distinction were on one side. And I think there, especially in some districts that I work with around the St. Louis suburbs, we've seen some bitterness. And yeah, there's some hard feelings.
Wow.
We have, yeah. All right, any other?
Yes,
Yeah.
am I on?
Yes,
I
hi.
have a hand up. Okay, yes, thank you. Two questions, if I may, please, and I'll try to be brief here. First, who's behind all of this ludicrous legislation? Surely the legislators don't sit down there in Jefferson City and think up all of this on their own. We are all aware, of course, of the National Rifle Association, but what beyond that group is pushing this kind of thinking and this kind of legislation? That's question number one. Number two, I'm a bit more specific on Senate Bill 66, the use of force against protesters.
Yes.
Do you know under what circumstances force would be lawful against protesters?
I'm going to answer that one first because my understanding of that bill comes from the version before it passed out of committee, and my understanding is that last week it was amended, it was changed. The original bill allowed the idea was that if a protester stepped on your private property, you were authorized to use lethal force. It was an expansion of stand your ground, which is currently law in Missouri. You are currently allowed, there's no duty to retreat in a confrontation situation in Missouri when we passed stand your ground in 2016. This was an expansion of that. So it allowed people to, if you understood that somebody was protesting and they approached your property, you could use lethal force. That has been removed, but I'm not sure that I can answer beyond that. The idea was that, you know, originally the part that was getting a lot of traction in particular was the use of cars. If if people were seen to be demonstrating in a space that blocked a roadway, that you had authority to use your vehicle with lethal force to drive through that protest. And I think that that was also one of the things that was stricken out of the bill, but I'm not positive. On your first question, you are right. There are people in our state who are pushing for this extremist legislation. It is not bubbling up. You know, we're not somehow home to, as a state, to unique wackiness in these legislation, in these measures. There's a group called the Missouri Firearms Coalition, which is a sort of a faux grassroots organization of people. It's owned by these brothers. You may have seen it covered in the national media, the Dorr brothers, D-O-R-R. Aaron Dorr is the leader for Missouri Firearms Coalition. And what they are is basically grifters. They're brothers who have these coalitions set up in multiple states. There's a great podcast about this. I don't know if, Jean, if you're still there, you can share the podcast link that covers the story of how these groups got started. But basically, they're further to the right of the NRA. The NRA kind of is less of a presence in Jefferson City in the last several years. Since they passed the permitless carry bill, they sort of got what they wanted and they didn't need to be as present in Jefferson City. So we see these groups that are even further extreme, like Missouri Firearms Coalition, who help write these bills. There's another one that's a famous citizen lobbyist named Ron Calzone. He leads this libertarian group of gun rights activists. They're aligned with the same people who protested in front of the State House against closing businesses during the beginning of the pandemic. They're aligned with some real extremist voices, but Missouri Firearms Coalition is on Facebook, and you can see the hate and they're openly racist and openly anti-government. That's who they are. I'm going to go on. I'm looking at the time and recognizing that I think we're done at 1:15. Is that right, Alice?
Right, 1:15.
Okay, so I want to cover some good bills that we have to share and some positive legislation that I really want folks to know about and to support, because our lawmakers in Jefferson City, the Democrats in the super minority, need to hear from us on these things too. So the first bill to watch is SB 60. It's sponsored here in this picture from Happier Times. Senate Brian Williams from St. Louis is the bill sponsor. And this bill is moving. Basically what this does, it's a bill to tighten police use of force. It would mandate many things, including de-escalation training, would require transparency surrounding officer-involved deaths. It would establish a duty to intervene for police. It restricts the use of chokeholds. It would prohibit military-style equipment from being purchased by law enforcement agencies, and basically also would require better screening for the people who are applying to be law enforcement officers. This is a bill that did just pass out of its Senate committee at the beginning of the month, and is one that we support very much. Put simply, what this bill is about police violence, right? It's police reform, but police violence is gun violence, and we cannot end gun violence without addressing this crisis in our state. We know that a single incident of police violence can plant a seed of fear and community distrust of police, making it harder to prevent or solve other violent crime. And in turn, it makes communities that are already fighting systemic and structural barriers more at risk for violence. So we know that police gun violence is a problem in our country, and we're really encouraged that Brian Williams, he's been on Sunday chat shows, and the Republicans have been supporting this bill, which is, he's worked really hard to get it to this point. So that's a really important and exciting piece of legislation. And the other thing that we're watching very closely, if you've been involved with Moms Demand Action in the past couple of years, you may know already that we have been working hard to pass a domestic violence bill that would prohibit domestic violence offenders from, and people subject to orders of protection from possessing guns. In the past couple of years, this bill has been carried by a Democrat, Tracy McCreary. This year, the bill, HB 473 is the bill number, is being sponsored by a Republican. And in fact, a Republican who is a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment. This is huge. And I personally, just speaking personally, am so excited to see this bill sponsored by a representative with his particular background. And I hope that it will be scheduled for a hearing. We do not know, it is assigned to committee, but we don't know more than that. And quite honestly, we are staying quiet and staying out of the limelight about this bill right now. Just really quickly, this bill would make such a difference for Missouri families, because currently in Missouri state law, we have no state law mirroring federal law that would require a court to prohibit someone who's got an order of protection or a conviction from possessing or purchasing a firearm. This bill would put that into effect and would mean that if you were, if a person is given, if you're a respondent to an order of protection, that the Highway Patrol would have the duty, well, first of all, the judge would have to inform you of this circumstance, then inform the Highway Patrol, who would then inform the National Background Check System, the NICS system, making it so that domestic offenders couldn't go out and buy a firearm. And it also, this bill makes another step, which is important, making it a Class D felony for a person who is convicted of a misdemeanor offense of domestic violence or subject to an order of protection, would make it a felony for them to possess a firearm. The reason this is important, it's so often the case in domestic violence cases that the charges don't necessarily sound like the seriousness of the offense. So a person can be a very violent offender and still be convicted of a violent misdemeanor offense of domestic violence. This bill would cover those people who are very violent offenders and make it so that they couldn't purchase or carry a firearm in our state. It's so overdue. This has been missing in our statute since 2016, and we're very excited to see this moving. So we mentioned Advocacy Day. This is what it looks like. We do this every year. Starting in 2016, we only had about 60 people. We keep growing to over 400 last year. We were really proud to have folks from every single state Senate district in the state joining us in the Capitol. That we were a sea of red shirts. Here's Justin in a picture with our state senator, Kayla Browden, and some other moms that you may recognize. Here we are meeting with Cherie Tolson-Reich. We know that we can't bring our Students Demand activists, our moms, and our survivors to the Capitol this year to talk to our lawmakers or to hear from our community partners who are working toward this domestic violence legislation with us. So things are going to look a little bit different this year, and I just want to give a quick pitch. We are going to do many of the same things that we always do. We're just going to be doing them online. We have access to this very powerful portal, or a platform, I should say, for Virtual Advocacy Day that will give people a chance to hear from the same speakers and lawmakers to participate in trainings, because a huge part of Advocacy Day for us is offering our volunteers this really important and empowering training on how to do advocacy, and getting them involved so that they can take it home and do it in their home community. But we're going to be doing all of these things from the comfort and safety of our homes this year. And if it's convenient, people can do it live. We're starting on March 2nd at 10 a.m. But if it's not convenient to do it live, people can join us throughout the week. The actions that people will be taking are all going to be on this website for the whole week. I know that Scott, I think, shared the invitation to our Advocacy Day on the WordPress website and in your weekly email about this presentation. But thank you, Alice. Thank you for doing that. I also have a cool QR code and a URL here. We can share that out again. I mean, there's so many advantages to Virtual Advocacy Day that we're trying to stay focused on the positives, like no carpooling to Jefferson City, no walking up the hill in the freezing cold, no taking the day off of work. We get questions from folks about this Advocacy Day, like, number one, do we have to wear red shirts? Yes, please wear red. If you don't have a Moms Demand Action red t-shirt and you'd like one, they're for sale, but you can also message me and I can hook you up. I have them in my basement. We also, people have also been asking, are we going to be meeting with lawmakers the way we typically do, like in those photos I just shared? Yes, we are talking right now with lots of friendly lawmakers who definitely want to meet with our supporters and have meetings. Those meetings might take place not only on March 2nd. So if you're interested, sign up and we will be slotting people into these meetings. They may take place later in the week. And just one last final pitch for joining us in Moms. The easiest way to join is to text the word READY to 64433. But you can also find us on Facebook and join us for our local meeting next week. If you'd like to dig in more to our legislative work, we're also very heavily involved in school safety work right now, planning our efforts to address school safety in Columbia, especially as we're going through some transitions right now with our school leadership. And we're also ramping up our work on community city gun violence with additions to that team. And we've got a brand new leader for the Be Smart Gun Safety campaign who's coming on board. And we definitely need more people and more help. So all are welcome. And last thing, if you don't already follow us on social media, that's where our group began, Facebook. Join the Facebook page. There's a public page, but there's also a private page. The reason we have a private page is because that's where we do our organizing. We have calls to action. Jean and I are constant, and Kathleen are constantly sharing updates about events, bills that we're tracking, or things that we need to get people engaged to do. And if you'd like to join the private page, you can friend me and I'll add you. And we also have an app. So I will stop sharing my screen. And I think we might have a couple minutes left if there are any questions.
And
Carl?
Yeah, Jean,
Yeah.
I see.
Who needs to go first?
Go.
Okay, well, let me presume that I'm going to go first. But this is kind of these are loaded issues and a loaded question, pun intended. But you folks have taken a very important and prime role in some of the public forums and community discussions with regard to community policing and so on. I mean, the city council has effectively, at the last city council meeting, taken a position on policy positions for the police department with regard to chokeholds. You may or may not agree with that position, but that's the position that we took. And I guess what I'm asking is and frankly, there's a history of gun violence even in council chambers is near St. Louis. I mean, one of the guys that sponsored me for National League of Cities meetings was a guy that lost his life in council chambers near St. Louis because of some crazy man that decided to start shooting. So I have a vested interest in this as well. And I guess what I'm wondering is how you feel about this interaction between the city and the community and the city council and community policing. And by way of disclosure, my daughter is a police officer in Columbus, Ohio. So she's very concerned about this either, and very trepidatious about the fact that everybody has guns. So I'm just curious about your comments about any of those issues.
I will say yes. First of all, Carl, I'm so sorry that gun violence in St. Louis affected you personally. I have many friends in Moms Demand Action in the St. Louis area who are involved because of that shooting, who lost people in that city council meeting, and it still resonates for them. We in Moms Demand Action, I will say, as an organization, in the last year, in 2020, have been developing new policy for us. This is a new area for us around gun violence and policing. And it was very much in response to the moment we all lived through last summer. And, you know, is based on evidence and research in the way that every town always presents policies in response to research, but it was time to take a position. So you're not wrong that seeing moms in front of city council talking about the issue of gun violence and policing is relatively new. It is something that we are newly engaging and wading into. I'm not sure if I understood your question though about what is our, were you asking what is our policy?
I guess. I mean, obviously there was a good deal of controversy about the whole chokehold policy and whether or not there ought to be an ordinance to prohibit this kind of thing, or whether we ought to allow the usual procedure, that is the police department, to make policy changes to suggest to the city council with the approval of the city manager. It gets complicated, but nonetheless,
Yes.
it was that was the direction that the most of the city council went, much to the chagrin of some folks who really just wanted to ban chokeholds. It was
Right. And I think that this bill that we're looking at in the legislature may address this question for us if SB 60 does advance. It does talk about chokeholds and would offer a standard around that. And I confess that the volunteer who attended that meeting and spoke in her Red Moms t-shirt, she wasn't speaking on behalf of Missouri Moms Demand Action, but as a mom's volunteer and sharing our position, which is, you know, understanding that the policies in the city are complicated and set through various mechanisms that, you know, we weren't privy to. We want to say that we know that there's evidence that some of the tools that policing, that Missouri police are engaging in pose risks that are not acceptable, and we can do better. And that's the point of our involvement. Also to support legislation that would move toward that point. But I take your point that, I mean, I'm not going to comment on the city council meeting because I watched it online. I didn't show up, but I know that it was fraught. And I think that the point that there was some consensus around, though, is that we need to work to prevent this kind of interaction for our community with the police. That's common.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the justification that these policy changes will mean that this is a very significant kind of thing. I mean, nobody wants to see this. I mean,
Right.
obviously, but
Right. Right.
I'm going to interrupt and suggest that we could stay a little longer if people are willing to, because Al has a question. If that's okay with Kristen.
Totally fine with me.
That's not
Al,
with
do you want
me.
to ask your
I'm gonna leave
question?
it.
You can leave it on Allison.
What?
I don't like that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the only question I had, Kristen, was earlier you showed a local meeting occurring on February 18th. Is that a virtual meeting, or
Yes.
what time and how do we get connected to that?
I'm going to grab the link to RSVP. It's Thursday nights. It's the third Thursday of every month. We have been meeting virtually since last March, I think, and we will continue to do so at least through July. We will not be having in-person events until it is very clear that it's safe for everyone. We do have a Zoom event every third Thursday, but we don't, we're very cautious about the privacy and security of our meetings. We have seen in other states some really horrific incidents that have happened to our volunteers. So we are very careful with sharing the Zoom link. But if you RSVP to the meeting, that's why we have to have RSVPs. We have to know who you are before we let you into a Moms Demand Action meeting. Unfortunately, it's not getting better. The trolling is still happening, even though we're virtual. So I'm going to grab the RSVP link for that out, and I will put that in the Alvin, and I'll put that in the chat.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
David?
Yes, just wanted to point out that I've got 1:16 now, so we'll officially close the meeting. But of course, if anyone wants to stay and chat, and if Kristen is willing to stick around and answer some, the chat, the meeting, the Zoom will be available. So thank you all for being here today and joining us. And Kristen, I appreciate you being here, making your presentation. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. You know, I forgot, you know, one of the things that we do at every single Moms Demand Action event of any kind is take a group picture. And I completely forgot to ask if I could take your all's picture. That coughing fit threw me off my game, but I really appreciate the invitation and your excellent questions. I'm happy to stay.
Do you want to
Yeah.
put the RSVP in the chat while people are still on?
I did just put the RSVP
Oh, okay.
link in the chat. Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep. Oops, no, you know what? I didn't. I put it in a direct message to Scott. Sorry.
That's what I was wondering.
Hard to
Thank
do
you. I
something.
appreciate it.
Here we go. Sorry about that.
Jean.
Alice, we need to have, who's speaking next week?
Oh, okay. Next week is Scott Clardy. Wait a minute. I have to look because they kept switching. Yeah, Scott Clardy with the Boone County Health Department. Think of your questions for him on vaccines. And then Martha Stevens will be on the 26th. And that's as far as we've scheduled. March will be lots of candidates.
Yeah.
And people should give me feedback. It's been suggested we try to have Ashland candidates, but I'm not sure we have space for that.
Jean, did you want to share something or ask me something? I see your hand is up.
Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted, I noticed that Alice had posted a question in the chat about whether what we do around candidates for local offices like school board level and city council. And I thought maybe you could speak for a moment to that issue.
I am happy to. The school board elections, along with city council elections, are races where the official Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate distinction is not available. That's a process that's sort of like it goes through our national team and involves a questionnaire that goes to people who are paid staff for every town. So we can't make that available locally for those races that are sort of below state rep. But every race below state rep, we still do outreach. In fact, I was just emailing with one of the school board candidates last night to invite them to our meetings to learn about what we do and to connect with our teams who are working on this issue to do some education and engagement. And we welcome every candidate to come and learn about us. And there are different rules around who we invite and who we bring to our meetings, but we're excited to talk with them and find out their positions and share what we know.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's important. I'm very concerned about the school board. I have 2 teenagers to get through.
The school board. And I'm supporting Jeannie Snodgrass and Helen Wade. The other part of my question was, Cori Bush was a gun sense candidate that was elected. Who else in Missouri? Unfortunately, our governor didn't make it, our governor candidate, but she was great. Who else in Missouri got elected who was willing to attach that to their name?
We have a few, unfortunately, as I'm sure you guys know, the legislature, the legislative races where we did a lot of our work and the governor's race, we didn't flip seats. in districts except for one. And that one seat that flipped from red to blue in Southwest Missouri was Betsy Fogel's seat in the Springfield area. And she is a mom's candidate and a mom's supporter. We had several mom supporters, meaning people who come to our meetings who've been actively involved in doing things with Moms Demand Action in the Kansas City area and in the St. Louis area who won their races and got elected. And I think actually the most exciting thing, honestly, Alice, was the number of people who've been with us who were in the state on the House side who got elected to state Senate seats. That is going to make a huge difference for us because they understand this issue. They've been in the House and seen the extremist bills and the debates for years. And now they're on the Senate side. And they're not just supporters, they've been with us for years. So I'm thinking of Greg Razor and multiple state senators across the state who've been elevated. Doug Beck is another, Steve Roberts, you know, people who understand this issue and are going to take a position on it in the Senate. It's going to really be honestly the way we stop this extremism. It'll stop in the Senate.
That's very exciting.
lawmakers.
Thank you, Kristen.
That's where hope. Yeah. Yep.
Anybody else? I went to an advocacy day. I think I've been to 2, and I'm interested in participating in this virtual one. And I encourage people to think of sending it to every organization that they're part of, because it kind of means you really can open it up, like your religious organizations, etc., to try to involve members.
That's what we're doing across the state right now. We just sent out email invitations to lots of lawmakers to join us. And even if they can't be in a meeting with us, to share with us or come or send their staff. And we are also doing outreach to student organizations, to faith groups, to women's groups across the state. And I absolutely encourage you to do the same. And thank you, Alice. That's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's not going to be the same. We don't get that same thrill of being in the hallway with hundreds of other people in red t-shirts, you know, feeling that incredible strength in the Capitol building. But we are hoping to get 500 people from across the state, and I think we can do it to take action. It'll make a difference and make a lot of noise.
One thing I was going to say, you pointed out that the committee hearings are still in person. So people like Martha have to go sit around people without masks.
Yeah.
Like,
I didn't mention that because it came up earlier in the meeting, but it is something that we are doing behind the scenes as well, is trying to press our lawmakers. You know, they've effectively made it so that we can't participate. I mean, we are sending official testimony on behalf of Moms Demand Action. We also encourage our supporters to testify on all of those bills. There are forms that you can fill out. They're not easy to find. They're not easy to navigate. They're different on the House side than on the Senate side. The Senate side testimony form has a 100-word maximum, and the House side does not. I mean, it's not an accident, right? So, yeah.
Kristen, may I suggest, since I've had direct exposure to the process in Jefferson City in terms of supporting or putting legislation through, that when you send your written testimony to any of the committees, Senate or House, is that you copy the news media and try to get even if it's put in the format of a editorial, but copy the news media so that it gets at least a broader view, and hopefully at some point maybe even our other media in terms of visual and otherwise can pick up on those kinds of efforts. And what I'm suggesting is coming up with ways to counteract the restrictions that are going on, using COVID and other means as an excuse
Yeah.
keep people away. It's very much like the efforts to keep people from registering to vote.
Yeah.
So try to do that to put pressure on the powers that be to say, hey, look, your nonsense is not working here.
One of the things that we did, I've had that experience actually of my testimony not being received by the Democrats on a committee. And that's not supposed to happen when you submit through the official form. So the thing that I've been doing that I would suggest to everyone also is when you submit testimony to the committee chair, to keep a copy and send it to the ranking Democrat so that they make sure to see, because we've been watching these hearings and you hear them say, well, nobody's here on the other side, and they're not being honest. They are hearing from us, but we can't let them pretend. And the other thing I would say, I don't know how comfortable everyone on this Zoom is with Twitter, but the other strategy that we're using, the other tactic that we're using is Twitter testimony, and just taking your phone and recording yourself for 1 minute saying your testimony and putting it on Twitter and hashtag MoLeg, make sure that lawmakers see it. We did this with the nullification bill when it was on the floor in the House, and we had a couple dozen folks doing virtual testimony that way. So they can't say nobody's showing up, and they can't say, as they do, they try to say, well, we had 900 people from the Missouri Firearms Coalition submit testimony. That's not, first of all, we know what that is. It's people filling out an electronic form and putting their name in it. That's not the same thing as taking the trouble of addressing your lawmaker and putting it out there for people to see. So I completely, I'm with you. We have to show that we're showing up. Carl, I think you have your hand up, and Alice too.
I did. I just wanted to say, I mean, it's one thing to have 500 red T-shirts at the state capitol, and that's impressive, and so on. I can't overestimate how impressive it is that you seek your friends at the city council level and some of these urban environments, if you will, to support that, and maybe send some of that stuff the state way as well. I mean, we are friends of yours, and we could frankly use a few red T-shirts in the crowd, besides some of the other folks that have lots to say at city council meetings, and I would appreciate that, and I think you'd find a warm reception from our perspective to try and help you out. Certainly from my perspective.
Well, thank you for saying that, Carl. I'm really heartened to hear that. We are, as I said, trying to do more locally, and that is an important thing for us to take back. I know Jean has been in council recently, and Rose has been, and we have in the past, when we didn't have this team working on local issues explicitly, really only interacted with city council and the mayor during that wear orange period where we have the proclamation. But there is more that we can and should be doing. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Any more questions?
Only an observation, Alice. I am a gun owner, but I thoroughly support a bit more common sense kinds of measures to minimize guns getting into the hands of people that shouldn't have them. Case in point, in a grocery store near my house, that we go to frequently, when all of the conceal and carry started out, I went into the grocery store and I saw this guy come through, and he had what looked like, I thought it was a pager. Yeah, right. He had a pistol. I mean, just kind of holstered, sitting out there. in the open for all to see. I mean, it wasn't concealed. But the thought occurred to me at the time, the feeling that went through me emotionally, in that I did not feel comfortable anymore in that environment, knowing that this guy's walking around with a pistol on his hip in a perfectly peaceful grocery store. And I said, God, what is this? So
Yeah.
there are those people out there who are gun owners, but also who believe that there needs to be some sense brought to bear in this whole process. So
Yeah,
I
thank you for
I
sharing that.
yeah.
I've had that experience in supermarkets too. I'm not a gun owner, but I think we all have the right to be able to shop for food safely without fear of if the guy in the next aisle is, you know, has it together. I mean, we have made some strides, by the way, in the last year. Many of major chains have decided to restrict open carry in their stores. And that's largely because of this grassroots movement of people saying, you know, this doesn't make me feel safe.
Yeah.
But I want to just say one thing, Alvin, about what you said, which is that you're a gun owner. And I am not a gun owner, but I am surrounded by women and men in this movement who are gun owners. And I think sometimes people think Moms Demand Action and they get our name wrong because it's long and clunky and they say moms who want your guns. We are gun owners. A lot of us are gun owners. A lot of the leadership is made up of people who are gun owners, who grew up hunting, who hunt now for food. We have our virtual local group leader who testifies so powerfully as a hunter and as a gun owner. Those are the people we bring to the Capitol to talk about this issue. And it's important because that's what we mean when we say that we are, you know, a multifaceted, and you know, we're nonpartisan organization with lots of people, and you know, moms are members, but moms, dads, sisters, uncles, anyone can join. And gun owners are a big part of what we do in Missouri because we are a big state of gun owners, right? We have a lot of gun owners in our state. So thank you for sharing that. I don't know that I remembered to mention that when I introduced the group, and it's so important.
I don't know how long we'll continue, but as co-president, I want to thank you and give you a bit of applause for the presentation. I mean, there's lots of sympathy in this group for what you're doing. I am a gun owner too. I'm frankly, as a former Marine, I guess I'm a trained killer at some point or another, but I have some pretty strong feelings about responsibility and gun ownership and registration.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm a recovering Army brat, and my father was a Ranger, and so I get it. You know, I get it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we bring all of these parts of ourselves together to talk about this, because this is, you know, we've gotten to a point with our gun laws where we're so far from what we used to have. I mean, that graph of just how things have changed in Missouri over the past 10 years. I mean, that's since I moved here. So we need to make change because what we've got is not working. You know, people walking around in supermarkets is not making us safer with guns. You know, people conceal carrying into our college campuses is not going to make us safer. It's just not. And law enforcement is with us, and we just have to keep pushing.
Let me add to your list. I'm a Special Forces trained medic, and I spent spent a year in Vietnam. So, but I still felt uneasy in the supermarket.
Right. I hear you. Yeah.
Kristen, I just wanted to say that I think this is such a difficult topic for people. They don't want to hear that our rates of gun violence, I don't know the exact aspect, went up 61% because we lost those more protective laws. I just think it's so difficult for people to be wanting to listen to that. Am I right?
It's hard. Yeah, I think it's still the case that this is a challenging topic, and I understand that people they see us coming and they think they know what we're going to say, or they think, you know, we're going to make you feel bad for owning a gun, and that's not the case. It's just that there are people who have really easy access to guns, and we shouldn't be making that possible. We shouldn't be standing in the way of law enforcement doing their jobs. We shouldn't be putting guns in public places, making it easier for people to steal more guns, putting more guns in the hands of criminals and gun traffickers. I mean, these are things that you sort of can't believe have to be said, right? When you get to the meat of the conversation. But you're right, opening the conversation can be hard. And that's why, we like to talk about always who we are, and, that we are a diverse group of, students, survivors, moms, dads, gun owners and non-gun owners, who figured out that this is the place to have this conversation, that there's work that needs to be done, and we need to come together to do it. I don't
Win,
know.
do you have a question? Okay.
Yeah.
Win?
Yes, thank you. I really need some education on just what Missouri has. I think what I understand is there's no training required to have a gun. What are the other things that we've lost?
Yeah, so we removed the requirement for a permit to purchase a handgun in 2007. And that was really the beginning of this upward trajectory that we're seeing now. The bill that you're referring to, permitless carry, we call it, eliminated the requirement to have a permit to carry a handgun. So I think the age is 19. You can be 19 years old and purchase a handgun. You do not anymore need to seek a permit. And the permitting process isn't just a piece of paper. It also used to require a full day of training, of safety training. It required you to learn the safety laws of the state, to keep you safe, right? So that you don't violate the laws of our state with regard to your gun. That's no longer required. You can still seek a permit. And there are some laws in Missouri where only permitted carriers can bring a firearm in. I think like right now, if you wanted to be a designated person in a church congregation to carry a gun, you have to have a permit, but it's not required. So that just happened. That went into effect in 2017. And we've really been seeing some horrifying results of that, because there's no step in there that used to be in place for sheriffs to talk to you about safety, right? To make sure you've had take those courses for training. And we hear all the time from lawmakers how valuable permitting training was or is. They always make a point of saying it's really good. You should really get your permit and get that training, but they don't require it. So people don't.
And you support background checks?
Yes. So that is the number one federal legislative priority for us. And that is the idea of universal background checks, or background checks on every gun sale. Right now, you probably heard of the gun show loophole, or the idea that there are lots of gun sales that happen in spaces where background checks don't exist. And so if you went to a store, if you went to Cabela's and went to buy a firearm, you'd have to go through a background check process. But if you went to an independent seller or some of our gun shows that we have lots of in Missouri, you could go and buy a gun out of the back of someone's car and never interact with the background check system. And we know a lot of dangerous sales happen this way, millions of them, and that the background check system works, that it catches people who shouldn't have access to a firearm, whether because they're a convicted felon or they have some other restriction. So that's what we're working for, is a universal background check, because that will immediately save lives.
Kristen, concerning the safety training, is it still required in Missouri for a hunting license that someone go through a safety training program?
I think it is. I think you still have to, yeah.
Is it the
Sounds
conservation one,
contradictory.
Kristen? Is that what they go through?
I think you can. I don't know that that's the only source for it. I signed up for it and I never took it because COVID happened. So I don't know.
I know, well, I don't have to do, fortunately, a decade or so ago, I passed the age where I needed a license for small game hunting. But at one time, I know that after a certain point, hunters had to go through hunter safety before they before they could get a hunting license in Missouri. So
I don't,
NRA, I used to be an NRA member in high school when we
Mhm.
learned how to shoot with a 22 rifle in the basement of the high school. I
Right.
mean, and they used to be all about hunting and hunter safety. They have abandoned that whole thing here now. Hunter safety, the hunters are still concerned about this, but the guys
Right.
who carry handguns and AR-15s are not. And,
Right.
I mean, this is nuts. This is crazy.
It's not responsible gun ownership, which is something that we know people agree is necessary. So why is it the case that the NRA has been lobbying so hard to remove it? It doesn't make sense. It's scary. I mean, luckily we've
Every one of the guns that I own, frankly, was I had to register for, and I had a background check for, and and I have a few, and whether or not you shoot skeet or you shoot targets or you go for game and you're a hunter and so on and so forth, there is a responsibility to gun ownership, but we've abandoned that now. We have
Yep.
totally abandoned it.
we are moving in a very different space right now. After the NRA sort of succeeded with permitless carry and stand your ground in 2016, I feel, this is my personal feeling, it's like they got their wish list, so why they don't need to keep working in Missouri. And what we've seen is this creep toward more extremist ideas that not only should we not require permits or background checks or safety training, but we should enable people to have guns in their cars, whether or not people want them on their property. We're talking about like in your car, sitting on your car seat at a daycare, right? Or at a hospital, at a place where people are in crisis. We want to introduce guns. I mean, it's
Well, and I'm a responsible gun ownership guy, but open carry is even better than conceal and carry, which makes it dangerous for the police department and everybody else. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm more worried about the conceal and carry folks than I am about the open carry folks, even though it's disturbing when you see them in a grocery store. There's no question about it. But really,
well, look, I feel like one of the things that when I started doing this work, we would hear in hearings in 2016 and 2015, what we would hear is, the other side, meaning moms, they're saying there's going to be blood in the streets if we change our gun laws. There's going to be blood in the streets. And they still say it, and they sort of sneer when they say it. But the reality is, our largest cities, we are seeing blood in the streets, right? We have seen just horrific levels of gun homicide and gun suicide in Missouri. And to sort of be glib about the trajectory that we're on with our legislation is pretty disturbing, because these are real lives. These are real communities that are being impacted. And the governor knows. The governor took a position 2 summers ago that he was going to act and deal with the issue. He was working with our mayors of our 4 biggest cities to try and move ahead some executive orders that didn't happen because he lost his nerve. I think that's my editorializing. But we're at a place where we are in a crisis, right? Missouri is seeing more gun death than last year, in the gun homicide rates in our biggest cities exceeded the records. We're seeing children in the crossfire, and it's horrific. And it's not, I don't think we're at a place where this is sort of a thought experiment anymore, right? Like the idea that more guns in more places is going to keep us safer, I think is demonstrably not true.
Kristen, a point of observation in the comment you just made, because I'm sure Carl and all of us, as well as yourself, will recognize that the level of gun violence is not restricted to the largest cities.
No.
We're seeing that right here in Columbia. I recall a time when Columbia, at least in terms of what we were getting in the news, was a fairly peaceful town. And now it's hard to go a week without it. People may not be injured by the violence that's occurring, but still there's reports of gunshots all over town.
That's right.
And I make that point because if I go back to, without dragging you guys through my experience with civil rights legislation in the state, but often what happened was when we talked about civil rights legislation in Jeff City, it was kind of an automatic signal to say, oh, that's just Black folks.
Mm.
And when you mention large cities, what happens in terms of the thought process and what people sometimes relate to is, oh, that's just Black folks. But in reality, when we're talking about gun violence and civil rights legislation,
Mhm.
we're talking about stuff that applies to the entire population, regardless of color, ethnicity, etc. So when you make those observations and you're talking to the politicians, make it be known that we're talking about safety for your constituents, whoever
Mhm.
they might be.
Yeah, it's just not true that it's only our largest cities. It's just that I know the moms in those larger cities. I work with the moms in St. Louis and in the surrounding suburbs of St. Louis. It's hard to overstate how grim it's gotten in some of our communities. And so, I mean, we have to shine a light on that. But I take your point, and I know that, you know, when we talk to lawmakers, it's important to put it in the context of all forms of gun violence and all communities being impacted, and definitely Columbia is involved. I mean, we had one of the things that scares me the most, and I think I lost this point in my presentation about the nullification bills, is that, you know, in Columbia, we've really benefited from, as has Kansas City in particular, from these federal, local, joint violent crime task forces. And these nullification bills will make those projects impossible. So, you know, the lawmakers in the House are suggesting that there's some workaround that they envision, but the reality is that a lot of violent gun crime prosecution, a lot of the work that's happening in our larger cities around getting guns off the streets happens with partnerships with federal law enforcement. And if we make that impossible, I mean, that's going to have a direct impact in towns like ours. I mean, this isn't a Kansas City only issue. This is a Columbia issue. It's very, very much a local issue for us.
I just wanted to mention, Kristen, your presentation will be on our website, Muleskinners/WordPress. You can look it up. And I personally, Janet's probably heard it before, but I'm going to send it to Janet and some other people that I think would profit from listening to it. If I'm able to do a link.
Well,
Absolutely.
think about it. I appreciate your presentation, and think about it. It's 10 minutes to 2. And there are still folks that are hanging around here trying to talk about this issue. It's generated so much enthusiasm that this meeting is extended way beyond even what we suggested it was supposed to extend an hour. So I appreciate it. I like what you do. I certainly endorse what you do. And I think we ought to have some more noise about what's going on here, because this is really serious stuff.
It is. It's really, thank you. It's personal for us. It's personal in Columbia. This isn't going to happen if we leave it for other people to take up this work. And I do appreciate all of your time. I sort of can't believe I just checked the clock. Can't believe how long I mean, I could talk for a long time. But yeah, thank you all. And I hope, Alice, when you share the video out to people, that you can find a way to edit out my coughing fit somehow. I'm getting over a cold, and I thought I was over it, but apparently I'm wrong. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And I'm sorry that media didn't show up, but you know.
That's okay. I have Twitter. I'll make my own news. I'll put it on Twitter.
Yeah,
so
I'm interested in knowing how to do that. So if you send me,
I would love to train you. I'm all over Twitter. I am very online, as they say. In fact, I already tweeted. I tweeted this already. I already put my picture out there.
Oh, cool.
that
Great.
we did this. So yeah, so when the link is available, I'll post that on Twitter too. People can watch it.
Great.
right.
And I can forward
Thank
your
you.
post.
Thank
Okay.
you, and all you folks stay safe, would you?
Yes, you
Thanks,
too.
Kristen. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.